There is a nice group of people present in this room, and I always say those who want to be somewhere are somewhere, so this is what we work with. Thank you very much for joining the session on measuring. I prepared everything except for the title.
And evaluating.
What?
Measuring and evaluating.
Measuring and evaluating. Measuring and evaluating effective development cooperation. We have an esteemed panel of 4+, also online, for the third presentation. Allow me to introduce you the panel. Today we have with us Nina Sofia Schlager, who is a PhD researcher in international relations and political science at Geneva Graduate Institute in Switzerland. She's back there. Nina is there. She will explain how variations in household behavior influence vulnerability to malnutrition based on a case study they did in Kenyan households. After that, we will have Dr. Thomas Wenker, Senior Evaluator and Team Leader at the German Development Evaluation Institute, DEVAL, who will deflash the word of climate finance and how there is no commonly agreed set of reporting practices to have a correct measurement of who invests how much in climate adaptation and what would be a good approach to do that. And after that, we will have Mr. Mamadou Ba, who is present with us from the African Development Bank and who works in tandem with his colleagues Patrick Mabuza, Francis Kemeze, and Toba Omotileva, out of which Toba will be also online during his presentation. And they are economists and research consultants at the African Development Bank who will take us through their assessment of institutional setups of development finance institutions, results measurement, and reporting systems. And last but certainly not least, Helge Roxin. And I think that you will have Stefan Leiderer also online present, but not presenting. Helge is a senior evaluator and team leader also at the German Development Evaluation Institute, DEVAL. And he will present the analysis of them both related to the effectiveness of German development cooperation in dealing with conflict-induced migration crisis, concretely related to the P4P, Partnerships for Prospects program of the German Development Cooperation, of which I always thought it was Partnership for Peace. But it seems that it's another P. So thank you very much. And without further ado, I don't know if Nina, if you... Okay, but then I can tell you how close to my heart measuring is. Yesterday I told colleagues that I will be moderating this session, and you know you have your zones in your life of content that you say like, okay, I feel very comfortable in it. Well, this is not one of them. The single thing that I do know, and our colleague who was on the panel yesterday, you might remember Thomas from the Canadian University in the panel on ownership of AIDS. He said, measuring, all the time measuring, but finally, isn't it, what do we do with what is measured? So, to be honest, today, even if it's not my comfort zone, I hope that our presenters will present things in human language that we can understand, because anything that is measured has to be used by practitioners like myself and my colleagues and you. So 2 minutes up. Nina, are you ready? Sort of. I don't know. I hope I'm not offending anybody. This is a joke, and take it as it is. I think the EU signed a package deal with DEVAL. I saw so many researchers from DEVAL over these 2 days. Do you know the German Development Evaluation Institute? That's great. That's very good. It's good if the single thing that we do not have, I'm a development practitioner working in an NGO, and what we don't have is time. Time to think, time to reflect. We do measure, and then hope to be able to do something with the measure. So Nina is ready. Go ahead. Go ahead and start. I hope you don't have to manage your own. You do? Okay. So, Nina Schlager.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Do you know it works? I can give you. Hello? I give you this one.
Yes. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for that nice introduction, Isabel. Today, I want to present to you our approach to predicting child acute malnutrition. We developed this at the Graduate Institute in Geneva together with my professor and thesis advisor, Ravi Bhavnani. So if you have any questions, we look forward to receiving all of them. Let me start with a quick overview of the presentation I want to give to you today. So I want to begin with our motivation and approach. Then I want to go over to the transparent analysis we can provide with that modeling approach, over to decision-making support, and fourth, I want to talk about low-cost data collection because that is closely related to our modeling approach. Let me begin with the motivation. So we figured that despite years of intervention, there's a growing body of evidence that the prevalence of acute malnutrition in Kenya is not declining. So in fact, every sixth child in Kenya is still malnourished, and the prevalence of GAM, global acute malnutrition, has not been under 15% for the last 10 years. So malnutrition is endemic, despite annually increasing budgets. In fact, yesterday, the European Commission, they published the new figures for the year 2022. So the additional funding that they want to spend on acute malnutrition will increase the EU's humanitarian food aid budget by around 55%, and compared to last year, will be up to 770 million euros. So this makes the EU one of the world's largest donors, and it adds up to more than 25% of the whole humanitarian budget. The question then becomes, how can we allocate aid more effectively? That's what motivated us for the MERIAM project. MERIAM stands for Modeling Early Risk Indicators to Anticipate Malnutrition. That was a, at that time, DFID-funded project that ran from 2016 to 2021. And we looked at the state of the art, and the state of the art in predicting famine and acute malnutrition crises was basically case studies, broad brush approaches, or expert-based estimations. And these approaches did not only lack formalization and transparency, but the problem was that we did a preliminary analysis and they deviated, like every third prediction deviated also from the observed malnutrition values. So that's why the MERIAM project was tasked with providing decision-making support using different modeling techniques to anticipate malnutrition several months ahead of a crisis. And we had partners from the University of Maryland, the University of Minnesota, and Johns Hopkins University. And because no single model will get it right all the time, we developed different kinds of models that were suited for different kinds of questions also. So you can see here that we had models with like a regional scope, a national scope, and a subnational scope. And we at the Graduate Institute specifically, we were tasked with unpacking the complexity of household behavior. So we really looked into household dynamics, and we developed that evidence-driven model. Evidence-driven model is a kind of an ABM that is like calibrated, seeded, and validated using empirical data. And here you can see our model development process. So it was basically an iterative process where we went over the literature to like distill the main mechanisms, and then we did a data search before we started to implement the model in Python, and went back to the drawing desk after some rounds of fieldwork because we did some validation is key in that regard, right? So we validated the model several rounds in Uganda and in Kenya. That was actually my first day on the project. It was quite interesting, so that was cool. And based on that fully calibrated and validated model, we can then make some analyses that I want to present to you now. So we can generate two kinds of outputs with that fully calibrated and validated model. Those are leading edge predictions. So that means they're true out of sample predictions, and key here is really how well does the model predict into the future. So we had a time frame of plus 4 months. So we estimate the model, like predict into the future, and re-estimate the model based on that error. And this is really to have like forward-looking analyses with a short time frame, because especially in conflict affected zones, like the situation can change really quickly. And the second output we can generate is scenario-based forecasts. So as with every model, this scenario-based, the leading edge predictions that I showed you earlier, they have one problem because they cannot predict black swans. They cannot predict something that has not been seen and that the data didn't show before, so like the COVID crisis and anything, and we heard that over and over again. So many people said, how can you not predict COVID? How can you not include that in the model? So, and this is really where the strength of this approach comes in, those scenario-based forecasts, because they are able to like basically identify key risk factors, sit together with experts, identify key risk factors, and then rerun those predictions. And because we wanted to have the model available to like a broad audience and the broadest audience possible, I also want to present to you the online user tool that we generated, which is called the Simulating Acute Malnutrition Toolkit. So the Simulating Acute Malnutrition Toolkit basically features all the model outputs that we generated with the project, and it's available online. And if you could now start that video, that would be fantastic. So, is it possible to start that video now? Okay, so I wanted to show you a video, but everyone who's interested, I will send you the link after that, so you can just play around with that tool. Basically features all the countries we have analyzed, and if you click on different countries, you can see all types of analyses and forecasts. But here it's really important to say that we only do this using historical data because we wanted to avoid misuse. And for everyone who's interested, we can just like circulate the link and send it to you. And the key challenge that we encountered here was really that we have either data that is not being analyzed using a model, or model that is like analyzed with shitty data. And like the first thing I learned is garbage in, garbage out, or something like that, right? So that's what we want to do now is we want to bridge that gap using low-cost mobile phone data collection. And this is the most recent project that just came back from Kenya to implement that study. And that's our last step to kind of holistic forecasting of acute malnutrition. So the data to analysis project is based on another grant than the Mariam project. And we really use self-reported mobile phone data to anticipate malnutrition. So we rely on open source data collection software, Kobo Toolbox. You really don't have to be a programmer to use it. And a minimal amount of information. And we self-collect this data from households directly for the first time. So because one of the main challenges was illiteracy, we were really keen on like exploring kind of emoji-based data collection. So we drew these little emojis, and we piloted the study with households over a period of 4 months. And as I said, I'm just back. And here you can see where we did that in West Pokot, 4 different regions in West Pokot, and we really wanted to see different sampling modes. So if we can collect it from households directly, or if this should be allocated at like CHVs or even the NDMA, which are our partner in Kenya. The next steps would include to scale up this analysis, to extend the geographical and also temporal coverage, and to fine-tune the models to have them fit like basically different contexts in different regions in Kenya. And we would also institutionalize the analysis. We are currently applying for a grant to do that, because we think that those models should be used and that whole forecasting mechanism should be owned locally in Kenya. So that's why we are planning to like train the nutritionists from our partners in Kenya and have like this kind of forecasting implemented in their monthly bulletins. So that's like just an early warning bulletin that is published, but is not using forward-looking analyses at the moment. And just to wrap it up, how this contributes to food aid effectiveness, because that's where we started in the beginning. So we think that our approach allows better targeting and targeting at more granular temporal and geographical units, because as I said, like the situation in conflict-affected zones can change really rapidly. And sometimes you don't know who to target within those villages, and that's something that our approach can easily do. And we also think that we provide a scalable approach because we use low-cost data collection and a robust data feed, especially in times of crisis, because what we saw at when COVID broke out, we saw that like basically the data feed was just halted when we needed data the most, right? When like nutrition information was most needed when COVID broke out, the data collection just stopped. And I think that's also something that we would include in our approach. And lastly, I think that our approach is timelier because we have this kind of automated analysis, closing the arc from data to analysis to then making predictions and having interventions that are like better targeted. Thank you very much. That's it from my part.
Thank you very much, and very much within the time, because what I forgot to say is that everybody got about 10, 11 minutes, 12 max, to present his or her work, and then to have a bit of time for the presentation, for the discussion afterwards. I like it a lot. I made a picture of it, and I will send it to you, Nina, about data, no model, no data. I love that one. So without further ado, Thomas, please go ahead. This is also
give me a second.
Your microphone.
Yeah, good morning. My name is Thomas from the German Evaluation Institute. Thanks for the kind introduction. Today I will present an approach that is joint work with Janos Borst and Andreas Nikla from Leipzig University. They are here online today with us, although we can see them. Okay, so the motivation of the paper is that in 2009, as you all probably know, the signatories to the Copenhagen Accord agreed to mobilize $100 billion by year by 2020 for climate change adaptation. However, to date, there's not really an agreed standard on how to report on this goal. And the lack of data quality makes it really difficult to compare the commitments between donors, also to assess the geographical sectoral distribution of commitments. And in the end, this also affects causal inference, right? Because the data quality can act as a confounder in our analyses. So what we are doing is to apply a machine learning approach to estimate the amount of over-reporting in the CRS dataset. The CRS dataset basically lists all 8 activities. In this presentation, we primarily look at the top 5 OECD donors. And we apply this machine learning approach to the 8 activities of these top 5 donors. Secondly, because the description in the CRS dataset are not that long, we also validate or combine, synthesize the evidence with more qualitative data. So I'll make this very brief. There have been some approaches to apply machine learning in data allocation research. They have mostly relied on keyword searches or manual data classification. So what we do is we try to break new grounds by using machine learning. Approaches are rather rare, but I have to say that there's a paper that came out recently by Tötzke a few weeks ago, who also do something which is a bit similar to what we are doing today, but I wasn't able to put it on here yet. Okay, so what are we getting at? What's the estimate? The Rio marker was introduced in 2009, and it basically flags every 8 activity in the OECD CRS dataset, and it intends to flag those 8 activities that intend to reduce the vulnerability of human or natural systems to the current and expected impacts of climate change, including climate variability, by maintaining or increasing resilience through increased ability to adapt to or absorb climate change stresses, shocks, and variability, and or by helping reduce exposure to them. Okay, so there are 2 basic rules. You can flag an 8 activity as being related to climate change adaptation if first the objective is stated in the activity documentation, and secondly, if it's really related to climate change adaptation. So basically, the marker can take 3 values, between 0 and 2, 2 if it's a principal objective, and 0 if it's not related, 1 in between. So what we are aiming at, our estimate, is to reclassify this marker for each 8 activity. Okay, to do so, we combine big and small data. So we have one data set by Wijkmans in 2017. He sampled about 5,000 projects from the data set, hand classified them, and we used that to train the classifier. Secondly, we have the CARE data set. What they did, they have high quality data on a sample of 117 projects. And they were actually coded based on a very close reading of project reports, and on and they also included the assessment of country experts. So what we basically have is the huge data set by CRS with 1.5 million entries, the quite large data set by Wijkmans, which relies on not too much information, the project descriptions, and the high quality but rather small n data set by CARE International. Okay, so what we did is to train the classifier using the Wijkmans data. Secondly, classify all Rio markers for the whole CRS dataset. And thirdly, to somehow repair for some shortcomings in data quality by estimating the rate of overreporting if CARE had re-evaluated all 8 activities in the CRS dataset. Okay, so we basically use Roberta, which is out-of-the-box approach to classification. This is mainly the work of my colleagues in Leipzig. They did fine-tuning on the data, but the model itself is basically out of the box with some fine-tuning. Okay, this is how it works. I think I'll skip that due to time. So basically, what we come up with is a 90% accuracy in classifying the data. So we run the 10-fold cross-validation to select the best model on the Wijkmans dataset, and we look how our classifier compared to the classification by Wijkmans. So out of all classifications, 90% basically were correctly classified by the model. So that worked quite well, I would say. Okay, if we look at the results, you can see on the y-axis the share of overreported 8 activities. So overreporting means that the Rio marker in the CRS dataset is higher than what the classifier would estimate it to be. And this can be between 0 and 100%. And we did that for the, as I said earlier, for the top 5 donors. And we have the mean as the dashed blue line. And you can see the amount of overreporting is quite stable over time and is about between 70 and 80%. Okay, this is quite high. So if we look at the CARE data set, which has who are looking much more into the data, they find only 22% over-reporting. So there's a huge mismatch between the high quality small n, low quality high n data sets. If we only look at the care data set and look at our classifier, we would find in this care data set exclusively about 54% of over-reporting. So we somehow need to correct for that. And we basically do that by getting a correction factor. So we have the marginal probability of Weikmann's, the Weikmann's data set, our classifier basically, predicting predicting over-reporting. Then we have what we want to get at, the probability if CARE had re-evaluated the whole CRS data set, right? So what's in between basically is the correction factor, what you see in the first term on the right-hand side. This is basically by simply use Bayes' theorem. We use a beta distribution as a distribution of the probability between 0 and 1. And what we come up with is a correction factor of 42%. So what we basically do is we have our estimate from the from our classifier, which is the black dots you can see. So you can simply focus on the 2019 data, for instance. The filled black dot would be the result of our classifier. As said earlier, it's around 80%, 75, 80%. And from there, we apply the correction factor, and where we come at in the end would be the solid line on the left, right, with a 95% interval. So after applying the correction factor estimated by comparing care data and our classifier, we would estimate the amount of over-reporting to be around 30%. So about a third of all 8 activities we would expect or estimate to be over-reported. So we ran some robustness checks, and so what we found. Our re-evaluation indicates a lack of quality in reporting of the RIO markers. We would estimate about a third of them to be over-reported because they do not explicitly mention climate change adaptation in the description. And even after the downward adjustment for insufficient information, we would, as I said earlier, expect every third activity to be not adaptation related. We don't see significant changes over time in reporting practice. And what we want to look at in the future is to more closely look at the individual country results to elaborate more on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Whilst he was talking, who knows the RIO markers? I looked them quickly up because then it makes a lot of, then I understand better the presentation. So I Googled is my best friend. It says biological diversity, desertification, climate change mitigation, reductions in absorption of greenhouse gas emissions, and climate change adaptation, risk mitigation, and vulnerability reduction. So I'm interested to hear from you what makes that the quality of the data can be enhanced, because the differences between the two with care, it was quite, so what makes that it's so different? So thank you very much. That will be for the Q&A. I hope somebody else will ask that, because I'm not allowed. So thank you very much. Mamadou, please take the floor. Okay, excellent. This was not the egg, but the timer. 12 minutes.
Thank you very much. Toba is online, please. Hello, Toba. We can't hear you. Huh? And you are blurry. I think that is a connection. It is in. Yeah. Okay. So let me present it. Okay. Oh, thank you very much. This morning we are trying to present our paper, which is entitled Assessment of Institutional Setups of DFIs, Result Measurement and Reporting System for Non-Sovereign Operation. And this is presented by me, Mamadou Ba, but it was supposed to be presented by my colleagues, Toba. We are working together. Okay, in terms of introduction, what we can say that DFIs most of the time provide advisory services, technical assistance, and mobilizing financing to engender sustainable development outcomes and impacts. For example, they try to unlock opportunities and delivering development impacts in development market. Also, they try to complement public investment in development and underserved markets. Also, they invest in high-risk sectors or market where commercial lenders are hesitant most of the time. Also, we see also, moreover, stakeholders now demand that DFI must measure and report the development impact for accountability, not only and for transparency. However, what we see most of the time, the institutional setups within DFIs, the framework and methodologies for measuring and reporting development outcomes impact are not well known. And we try to fill this gap in this study. The motivation of this study. Most of the time, DFIs, their mission are well known. For example, among practitioners, of course, but for example, LEMA 2015 have provide some useful information about the mission of DFIs. For example, IFC mission is to advance economic development and improve lives of people by encouraging the growth of private sector in developing countries. In IFDB, it is to fight poverty and improve living conditions in Africa, of course, through promoting the investment of public and private capital projects. Also, it should be noted that DFIs are doing something which is also important in harmonizing the development impacts indicators for private sector operation, which is called IPSO, if some of you maybe know about it. However, nothing has been done so far for framework or methodology used for assessment. And what should be also noted that most DFIs are working in the same market, deal with the same client and report to the same stakeholders sometimes. But the result measurement and result and reporting system, institutional setup are less studied. That's why we try to, which is one of motivation in this study. In the study, the key questions are, first, how do DFIs measure or monitor their development impact? Second, how DFIs result measurement reporting system and mechanism set up internally, and how integrated or effective are these setups? Also, from there, the two main objectives are the following. First, we want to identify, analyze, and compare institutional setups of the result measurement and reporting system among DFIs. And the second objective is to derive some lesson needed to kickstart discussion on the effectiveness of DFIs, RMRS, and harmonization of framework setup if it is feasible. What we find in the literature, some evidence on result measurement and reporting system, although the studies in this field are less. For example, we have Shire 2016 and the Oxford Policy Management, OPM. Sorry, okay. So, revealed that many DFIs have the framework for ex-ante and ex-post development outcomes. Some DFIs ex-ante impact tools play no further role after the approval of the investment decision which have been made. Most RMRS framework measure short-term outcome as against long-term impact. Most framework also rely on direct outcome, but some now capture indirect and induced outcome, even if it is sometimes challenging in this case. Existing framework also assess the outcome at project level, but few extend to portfolio level. Here, what we know about the result measurement and reporting system, there are three main stages. In this case, we have the ex-ante. The first phase is the ex-ante assessment. The second stage is the monitoring and supervision stages, and the third stage is the ex-post stages. And here, in this graph, in this figure, we have an example of integrated result measurement system which link all the three stages what we was talking about: the ex-ante, the monitoring and supervision, and the ex-ante assessment. And here we have all the link between these three stages, giving us a full integration of these three stages of result measurement and reporting system. As you can see here, for example, ex-ante is related to monitoring, and this one also is related to ex-post assessment. As for example, if we take the monitoring supervision, ex-ante put the indicators and target which should be followed in the monitoring stages. Also, for the ex-post assessment also, after the completion report of the project, the results could be used for subsequent ex-ante assessment so that we have a full integrated system. We can have a 360 feedback loop between these stages. Also, we intend to see the setups of institutional result measurement within the DFIs. So we try to construct an index of integration of these setups within the DFIs. In this case, we construct an integration index within this of the setups of this RMRS within the DFIs. And for this index, we have three questions which have been done through a binary variable. The first thing we try to see if a DFI use the same framework for ex-ante and ex-post. The second one is if the same unit or team oversee both the ex-ante or the ex-post assessment. And the first one is if ex-ante team is involved in the monitoring or reporting process. And for each of these this question, we have a binary variable taking 1 if it is the case and 0 or less. And from there, we have categorized from the sum, the cumulative sum of this binary variable, we have a score. And from the sum of the score, we have a categorization of integration of the system within the DFIs. And then we have find 4 categorization of integration system within there. We have the strictly hard integration, meaning that the DFIs have both the same framework for the ex-ante and ex-post, the same unit who oversees both ex-ante and ex-post assessment, and the ex-ante team is involved in the monitoring and supervision team. And we have the other one, for example, the strict self-integration, meaning that the DFI didn't fill this criteria. In this study, we have done, we collect data from a semi-structured interview from DFIs, which have been done by sending a questionnaire and doing interview with these DFIs. Overall, we have interviewed 11 DFIs, including 7 multilateral DFIs and 4 bilateral ones. And from there, we have we are presenting now our finding. What we find: one, all DFIs report that they are conducting ex-ante and ex-post assessment, development outcome assessment for all the project, and also they have a rigid measurement and reporting system in place. Second, most of these DFIs also, the ex-ante assessment only serve as a baseline and target indicators for monitoring, supervision, and reporting ex-post development outcome. Nevertheless, we find that few DFIs, including the IFDB, IFC, and EBRD, they use the ex-ante assessment as a decision-making tool to inform the management and board or decision to approve a project. Ah, okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Let me. Oh, we try to see also if impact evaluation is conducted within DFIs, and we find that most of multilateral DFIs conduct ex-ante impact evaluation. The other one didn't do it. I'm going to go quickly, and here we try to see if the DFIs within them there is a combined framework for ex-ante and ex-post assessment also. In this case, we had the result here. Regarding the institutional setup of result measurement within DFIs, also according to our integration system, you find that for the strictly hard integration, integration model, we have 4 DFIs who are strictly hard integration, and the others one split in the other indexes. Also, we try to see here in this case where are the ex-ante and ex-post assessment team are located, if they are located in the research unit of the banking unit within the DFIs. Also, here we also asked if the DFI sometimes outsource some research, some result measurement and outcome reporting system, if they outsource some activities within DFI. But outsourcing here, we mean that if they give some activity to consultant for tracking or reporting or collecting data. Here we have the challenges which have been mentioned by DFIs also. Okay. And budgetary and research content have been reported as the main constraint within DFIs. In terms of conclusion, I will conclude. Yeah, give me 1 minute. What we find that there is a strong feedback loop between ex-ante and ex-post assessment development outcome. However, this 360-degree feedback loop appear to missing in most of DFIs, as we have shown found in our study. This feedback loop also can be achieved in a fully integrated approach to RMRS using a strictly hard integration, meaning that all the DFI meet the 3 criteria which we stated. Beyond reporting direct or immediate outcome, also development impact, development project, many DFI do not conduct a rigorous impact evaluation, as we mentioned also. In terms of recommendation, the first one, DFI should consider a fully integrated approach to RMRS going forward, as this helps to improve the future ex-ante of subsequent project and cost correction during project implementation. The second one is, whereas DFIs are making effort to harmonize indicators for reporting development outcomes, such effort might be needed to harmonize also methodologies. And internal and external capacity building or awareness creation is necessary to ensure that the shareholder share a common understanding of result measurement and monitoring system and reporting system. Thank you. Here we have the research team. The lead was Patrick Mabuza, and we have Francis Kemeze, Omotilewa, who is online, and me, and Betty Sambenkeru. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is very interesting, and I was hoping that you will explain who are all the DFIs, because I went to Google, my friend, again, and I found GRAMI as well, but also MFIs and credit banks. So thank you very much. Without further ado, and then we have about 20 minutes for the Q&A for this interesting topic. Go ahead, Helge.
Thank you, Isabella, for having the floor. I try to be very quick so that we have a little bit time for discussion. The presentation I will going to show you is based on 2 studies here that Deval executed during the last years. And I will do a brief introduction of those studies and then at the end draw conclusions for the larger humanitarian development cooperation peace-building nexus debate. We first did a literature review, which you can see on the left side, together with IBA Sweden, on linking or the links between humanitarian assistance and development cooperation in forced migration crisis. And then a couple of years later, we did a strategic evaluation on the effectiveness of German development cooperation in dealing with conflict-induced migration crisis, exemplified by the Partnership for Prospect initiative. That's probably the longest title that you've ever heard in English. And here, with a second evaluation, the focus lies purely on development cooperation, and the link there is between short-term development cooperation and longer-term development cooperation. To have a brief reminder, probably most of you know about the gap already. The discussion traces back to the 80s, I believe, but has been picked up prominently in 2016 on the World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul. I would just quickly like to quote the basic challenge, that is, humanitarian and development actors need to work collaboratively across silos and mandates to implement plans with a clear and measurable collective outcome that reduces the vulnerability of displaced persons over the long term. So that's the description of the challenge. Very quickly, as to the literature review that we did, we identified 5 different dimensions where humanitarian assistance and development cooperation differ significantly. That is concerning the objectives, it's on the modus operandi, on the principles, on the legal basis, and on the actors. I don't go in depth here because we don't have enough time for that. And then we operationalized and broke it down into 7 specific gaps of the humanitarian development nexus. That is, there's a gap between vision and strategy, there's a funding gap, there's a planning gap, there's an institutional gap, a geographic gap, an ownership gap, and a sequence gap. And the literature review identified some progress as to the Syria crisis when it comes to bridging these gaps, especially compared to the early years of the Syria crisis. But we found that there's a lack of empirical evidence on the effects of the missing link between humanitarian and development assistance. So basically at that time, the whole literature was based on conceptual considerations and less on empirical evidence. Then we tried to fill this gap with a strategic evaluation on Syria, the Syria crisis. I read to you the title already, so the topic, I will skip it here. The case that we did on the Partnership for Prospect was based on two pillars. One was the labor-intensive employment part of the Partnership for Prospect, the so-called cash for work, and it was mainly focusing on waste collection and infrastructure. And the second was on salary payments for Syrian teachers in Turkey and for Jordanian teachers in Jordan, both for Syrian refugee children. So our overarching question was, what is the contribution of Partnership for Prospect to creating life prospects for refugees and the vulnerable host population, as well as to stabilizing host communities? So how do you bring the long-term perspective in? I do not want to dive too deep here into the design. It was a multi-method design of the evaluation. We had two panel surveys, large or maybe medium N, you see the number here, N 2,600 in Jordan and in Turkey. And to get a better impression on that, this is to show you where we did the surveys and the interviews. That's basically northern Jordan, Amman, and in Turkey was Istanbul, Gaziantep, and what is missing here is Greater Ankara as well. Maybe what is interesting here is the panel attrition, which might look on a first look quite large compared to developed countries. So it's three quarters of the population we reached again in the second wave of the panel, and there was a relatively large panel attrition compared to other studies in developed countries, but in the context of flight, we believe that was relatively good and took us quite some effort to get there. Briefly on the results on the Partnership for Prospect, broken down along the OECD DAC criteria, we found that the Partnership for Prospect initiative was a coherent and relevant policy initiative. It was effective as to contributing to temporary mitigation of the precarious situation of refugees and vulnerable hosts. And it was particularly effective as to vulnerable households, especially as to women. And what was most surprising for us was the second part of the slide is that we found lasting effects of the Partnership for Prospects as to mental health, measured by life optimism and integration, or a feeling of integration of refugees in the communities, and also as to the strengthening of social cohesion. I just took two aspects of the social cohesion findings here. We found that in host communities, through building and maintaining infrastructure and equal participation of refugees and hosts, so it was a 50-50 program, both profited from the program. That helped to increase social cohesion. And the Turkish participant especially, they were had permanently a higher degree of trust in Syrians than non-participants. And that's something I would like to show you quickly on one chart. So I would like to focus on this column here on the hosts. And you can see in the control group that you see orange is no trust and dark blue is full trust. And on the control group side, you can see that it starts already at midline. That was about 2 weeks into the intervention with low levels of trust, and it really explodes into basically no trust anymore 2 or 3 months after the intervention. That was under the circumstances of Turkey at that time, with large social tensions between the two groups. And you can see with the participants, it starts already with a better degree of trust, and it does not deteriorate nearly as much as it does for the control group. So it's basically not increasing social cohesion, but under the conditions of social tensions, it's stabilizing social cohesion. I will skip the teacher salary here because it goes too far, but what we found next to those relatively positive outcomes of short-term measures, we found that there's no lasting improvement of the socio-economic situation of Syrian refugees in general, so no sustainable increase in income or long-term job creation or something like that was not to be found. When we connected with the Nexus debate, the Partnership for Prospect was fairly well linked to the host countries and also to the regional refugee and resilience plans. So the connect between humanitarian and development actors was actually quite good. But we found that the main challenge here was not the missing link between those two realms. It was rather on the context, the crisis context itself. Due to the protected crisis, there was only a limited long-term perspective for refugees. And you can see where the arrow is here. Actually, German Development Corporation was about to go into more regular, typical development cooperation interventions after a certain time, after some years, so more capacity building, vocational training, going deeper into those. And we found that there's a large risk to fail due to those conditions that I mentioned, the context conditions. And whilst we were looking for bridging the gap at the beginning of the evaluation, we found it doesn't make sense in that context. And why is what I go into later as well. So the HDP nexus covers this to a certain degree. I've missed out on the peace so far, on the peace building. Peace building comes to terms with context, but it does help only in the conflict country in Syria. And if you take for granted that there's a protected crisis and you don't have peace and you work in neighboring countries, we ask ourselves, okay, what can you do to improve the situation when you take no peace or conflict for granted and you're still working in the neighboring countries? And we found, when you look at this this graph, we took it from ECDBM, we found it quite helpful. That's the peace axis here, development cooperation, peace building, no sustainable development without peace. We found it's true to a certain degree, as I said, because of course peace helps a lot, and when there's peace in Syria, there might be a perspective for Syrian refugees to go back to Syria, but as long as it's not there, we found that there still is lots of unclarity concerning how exactly or what exactly to do in the neighboring countries of Syria whilst there is conflict. And peace building does not address this main challenge. So we would suggest to extend the nexus to a further pillar shown here. I don't try to confuse you further because we mentioned lots of P's already. We called it triple P here. So we believe that this nexus was quite well established in the neighboring countries of Syria. But what was missing was actually the triple P here. We called it polity, policy, and politics. And that is purely focusing on the partner countries. We think that there needs to be an institutional and legal order of the state at hand where you're working at that can guarantee at least a minimum of stability and reliability for working with partner countries. Policies need to be in place, especially migration policies need to be in place that are also reliable and that are matching the policies of donor countries. And finally, you need to have politics in the sense of transparent processes and dealing with social conflict and reaching consensus in the partner countries to be actually able to create long-term perspectives in partner countries. So the main conclusion is that the conceptual discussion on the nexus might have been too much placed on internal conditions and too much placed on the donor landscape and too less placed actually on the ownership of partner countries, the neighboring partner countries of Syria, what do they actually want? And that is quite similar to the peace building aspect because it's hard to control and it's hard to affect for development actors. So we would like to see a triple nexus here as well, but that's the Humanitarian Development Cooperation triple P nexus in neighboring countries of Syria. Thank you.
Thank you, Helge. Thank you. This links a bit to some of the things that we discussed about yesterday. We had a colleague from, please stay there, and I would like to invite the panelists to join Helge on the chairs up there. And let's start a Q&A. We have 20 minutes for that. So, yes.
Thank you. So I'm Kangs from King's College London. I have one question to Nina and one question to Thomas, if that's okay. So the question to Nina is, how was the sample or the data that you collected? So I was thinking about, for example, if we are looking at the poorest people, they don't even have they don't have the devices, they don't have the technology to answer or to respond to your survey. So you might, underreport or underestimate the problem. Another related problem is that maybe people are trying to exaggerate their problems to get more support. I'm not saying that's bad. I mean, it's okay. I think it's a good thing that we give more support to people. But how are you about to deal with that problem? And for Thomas, if I can ask the question about the languages, because I see that we have a lot of countries with different languages. I know that you are using the NLP process. So I was thinking about, because I don't know French, I don't know German, but maybe there are some words in French or German that have some meaning, the same meaning as climate change or weather related. And how did you account for those differences in languages in your model? Thank you.
Yeah, I also have a question to Nina. I was wondering which factors actually are the best, have most explanatory power to predict malnutrition at the local level. I would guess it's conflict events and probably also variability in rainfall or some other weather measure. And the second question was also related to this 1/6 of children with malnutrition actually. How you basically, I mean, you raised that in the beginning of your presentation, but you didn't pick it up later on, how you would address to reach this, basically, probably most poorest households actually, and how you can address that.
Thank you. I will take one more there, and then I will have another round, yeah? Just a second.
Yes, Amelie Eulenburg from DEWAL as well, joining my colleagues here. I have one question for Mamadou. Thank you very much for this very interesting lesson, so to say. I was curious whether you have checked also the criteria of additionality in your inquiries, possibly as an ex-ante indicator. I know that EBRD is checking that definitely, but it would be interesting to know whether you did this for the private sector engagement. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to invite the panelists to answer the questions, and then we have another round, yes? Go ahead, Nina.
Cool. So thank you, Ken, for that question about the data and about the data collection and quality. That's a very valid one, especially if we go into that modeling exercise. So we used data from the National Drought Management Authority in Kenya. They have like exceptional data that has longitudinal coverage on the household level. That's something that is very special, because we were looking into other data sets that didn't have that. Either geographical coverage was missing or longitudinal one. So and what they do is a purposive sampling of 30 households at the ward level. There's the lowest administrative unit, and they think then that is representative for a ward as a whole, to have then a certain nutrition situation there in that ward, if that makes sense to you. Did that answer your question? And about the over-reporting and under-reporting, that is also something, because of course, as you said, nutrition is political, right? So you might want to over-report, but the question then becomes if you would be interested in false positives or false negatives, right? What is better to predict the nutrition crisis that didn't happen, to have all this money mobilized by donors, or the other way around, which you have to be even more cautious than not forecast a really severe nutrition crisis if it in fact happened, right? So that's something that ties into that as well, I guess. And the second question, thank you so much for that question. So the variables with the most explanatory power, those were certainly climate-related variables. We measured this with the greenness of terrain. We were looking into different factors, also the temperature and the rainfall, but we thought that greenness of terrain was most representative of that. Also, livelihood was important, education, and at the household level, probably also the water source, because that's also closely linked. And conflict, that's an interesting point. But the data sets we found, we were looking at ACLED data and also different conflict data sets. But the problem is that those conflicts that we would be interested in, which are basically small-scale herding conflicts or something like, you know, that would go to like local arbitration courts, there's no really good data on that, so we didn't include that, but that's something that should be really considered in the future, to like include this kind of like conflict data where we can capture what we really want to get at. So that's noted. And yeah, of course, how can we address those 1 out of 6 children? That's a very valid question. And I think that the ultimate goal of that scenario building exercise of our model would be to include different types of intervention, like as scenarios, and then see how that would affect malnutrition rates. But that's very complicated because there's so many different interventions, so that wasn't in the scope of that project. But that would ultimately be where we would like head to, right? Like to include that in the EDM.
Thank you, Nina. Amadou?
Okay. Thank you for the question regarding additionality. Of course, this is a relevant point. However, in this study, we was most focused on the result measurement and reporting systems. For example, if there is ex-ante assessment within the DFI ex-post assessment, if it is there, and monitoring and supervision. But however, we should note that the additionality in these DFIs is already present in, for example, in the ex-ante assessment. For example, if we take the IFDB where I am working on, we work on the ex-ante assessment of additionality and development outcome of the non-sovereign operation of the bank. And in this case, in this ex-ante assessment, we try to see the additionality of the bank, including financial additionality and non-financial additionality. But specifically in this paper, we more focused on the framework of assessment, ex post and ex-ante assessment, and the monitoring, reporting, monitoring and supervision, where the institutional setup, where they are located. Does the DFI have the same framework for ex-ante or and for ex-post assessment? What is the link between them? If there is an institutional mandate to be together or to work together also. What was the main object of this paper? But I think that in next research we can try to see how additionality are also measured within DFIs. What is the different thing and between them, and to try maybe to see if it is a possibility of harmonizing this kind of additionality, how they are measured within DFIs. Thank you.
Thank you. Toba wants to answer this question as well online, so our colleagues try to link him up. Thank you. Please go ahead, Toba. We don't have sound. I hear you have a chat function, so if you want, you can write your input in the chat and your colleague will read it out loud, okay? Thank you, Toba, and apologies. Thomas, go ahead, please.
Okay, so on the question of bias, yeah, that's a very good question. We basically looked at 2 sources of bias. One is language, and the other one is description length. So I can say the Japanese descriptions are very short, and the French descriptions are in another language. So we looked at both by translating the French descriptions to English, and then rerunning the whole classification on the translated data. Most of the other donors actually report in English. So what we found for the French case, the language issue, that in about, I would say 60% of the years, it's rather close. but in between there's a gap. And so this is something we are looking into right now, the different reporting practices across donors. With regard to the length, actually you would assume that you have a higher probability of classifying a given activity as being zero, as being underreported, more probably if the description is very short. So this might be a problem for the in the Japanese case. But actually, if we aggregate the numbers, in the end, the difference is not very large. So actually, it was the difference between the black circle, the filled one, and the one that was right in the middle. So the difference is marginal. Thanks.
Before you go, did you get the answer on the neuro-linguistic thing? Okay, so I'm glad you understood. Before I give you the word, Helge, your colleague of Nina wants to contribute also to the questions she had. So if that's okay with you, 2 seconds. 1 minute?
Sure. Thanks. So just to address the 2 questions and add to Nina's response, to Khan, to your question, I think the issue of sort of representativeness, we can't really do much with the NDMA data because that is already a sort of structured initiative. But with our low-cost data collection effort, we are collecting data in the same sites as NDMA, in sites not covered by NDMA, directly by households, and then using enumerators. So in that sense, we have a sort of quasi-experimental design to check whether the data we're getting sort of closely match what the NDMA is collecting, and also how reliable self-reporting by households actually is, right? To get to your point on the 1 out of 6, I mean, this is a key puzzle that drove our initiative, because what we found that even within the same households, within the same villages, you might have certain households that face acute malnutrition and others that don't. And so if you abstract up even to the ward or, you know, ADM 3 level, you're actually missing that, right? And so the key intuition of our household level model is to look at factors like household assets, household saving, right? The ability of households to actually switch production strategies, and then learning, right? And we don't assume that, you know, these are rational agents. We assume bounded rationality. So learning could actually mean result in a suboptimal outcome over time, right? And so part of the notion with the longitudinal data is to be able to track the ability of a household to reach nutritional sufficiency over long periods of time, right? And basically look at these sort of resilience trajectories. And what we're doing in a sort of different analysis is to see whether we can identify particular signatures of resilience at the household level, right? So characteristic signatures. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Apologies, Helge. Please go ahead. Or, yeah.
I think I didn't get a question, so we can have.
Oh, you didn't? I thought
round,
you did.
If I didn't forget it.
I thought you did. I hope. Well, I am not allowed to ask anything. I will ask you in the coffee. You had a question. We have 7 minutes until we finish another round.
I think my question has been answered. I think by the contribution he made to the question asked Nina. But maybe by way, just to ask Rosine, I don't know. You know, in your presentation, you made mention of payment of salaries and work for pay as a means of building peace among residents. I mean, those displaced residents. I don't know if your work also look at, you know, the political factor that actually caused that the Syrian crisis, because it's not just the displacement. It's not the people that were displaced that actually caused the conflict or that leads to that peace, but there's a political undertoning. So I don't know if your work also included that.
Thank you. One more question?
Hello, my name is George Quist from the University of Cambridge. I have a question for Amadou. So you mentioned in your presentation the fact that a lot of these DFI boards don't consider ex-ante considerations when it comes to approving projects. Could you please expand a little bit more as to why these DFI boards don't consider ex-ante factors? Because that's a little puzzling in my opinion.
Thank you. Just a second, I hear that Toba is active. What is he? He's written. Okay. You want to read it out? Do I have to read it out? So on additionality, this is area that all DFIs should consider development investments. Remember, the keyword is development, and additionality of DFIs means what do DFIs bring to a project that other commercial lenders do not bring. At the moment, very limited DFIs include this concept in their result management and reporting. It is certainly something to consider going forward. Toba, please tell everybody to utilize the Kampala principles for private sector involvement in development. We discussed about that yesterday, and lots of that would solve this partly a bit of this problem. Very last question, and then with the answers we will round up.
Yeah, my question is to the gentleman who did the last presentation from Deval. So you mentioned these triple nexus and suggest, as I understand, a quadruple nexus. From an academic point, these concepts are a little bit vague, actually, I have to say, because they get really wide and it's not really clear what they mean. And from a practical perspective, I ask myself, some humanitarian crises don't lend themselves very well to combine them with development initiatives. So for instance, people in conflict-affected areas that are displaced from their initial livelihoods, it's very hard for them, for instance, to engage in agricultural activities when they're displaced. So I was wondering whether this is really for only specific types of interventions that are useful for situations when people are displaced to bring in development initiatives. I understand the conceptual need to do that, to combine that, but practically, for me, it seems that there's sometimes really limited space to do that. I don't know. I wanted to get a little bit of your critical opinion about this overall concept.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead, Herbert.
Yeah,
I think both questions are for you.
Yeah, and they're both going into the political realm. And actually, let's try what we try to show that it goes beyond what development actors are doing. And the nexus, I believe, it has practical consequences, but not maybe it's hard to trace it academically and methodologically. But what we found is, I think we have a relatively methodologically well done study that finds, okay, you have been able to get to a certain point of outcomes, but you can't go beyond that. And when you try to link it to the nexus debate, you find it's not sufficient. I mean, humanitarian actors are linking up with development actors, and then development actors are stuck due to political reasons. That's what you mentioned. Actually, because of that, because Turkey has migration policies that are relatively favorable, because they say we will include Syrians in Turkey for a longer term, but they are threatening to instrumentalize refugees all the time, send them back to Syria, send them to Greece or whatever. So you can't rely on that. And when you do development politics properly and you go in depth in structural development, like building up capacity in the country and so on, you much more rely on these stable context factors, and you don't have them. It's even worse in Jordan, because Jordan sees Syrians as guests, temporary guests, and they don't have a long-term perspective to stay there. So we try to build long-term perspectives, but actually what we are missing out on is exactly that, the political dimension in the neighboring countries. This is what we mean by triple P. And actually, I don't know if it's possible to link it up to what we are doing. We just try to feed in a certain degree of realism, maybe to what we can actually do with development politics. And this realism, I think, comes into the debate as to the peace-building aspect already. That's why the P has been included. But it doesn't make much sense in the neighboring countries because you have peace there. The P is the peace-building part is the problem in Syria. And we still have these political factors undermining what we are doing in the neighboring countries as well. So that's actually what we found out. And we have been looking for, all the time how to better link up the different actors, because we were put on that track with the literature reviews. So we tried to build bridges all the time until we found out it doesn't help. You can't build bridges between those to effectively improve aid and development cooperation because it has its limits due to the context that you can't really solve.
Because the prospect has to become in Syria as well, not only in the surrounding countries.
Okay, thank you, George, for your relevant question regarding the use of ex-ante at the board decision. Maybe I did it say it well, or it is a misunderstanding. I have said that, you know, if an ex-ante assessment is used for putting targets or indicator which should be followed, you know, and for DFIs, some of them use the ex-ante assessment as a tool for decision making, for approval of the project at the board level. You know, it is not all the DFI will do it, but some DFI do it, including, for example, the IFDB. For example, the ex-ante assessment of additionality and development outcome is a document which should follow with the project appraisal report at the board level and which should be used by the board member to approve the project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would you like, what I would like to ask is, because we have to round up, I would like to ask the panelists to, do you have a final reflection about what you heard about the other inputs, and then we can round up. Lina? No? Oh my God. Okay,
just to
good.
thank you.
Go ahead.
And it was a pleasure to share this conference with all of you, and hoping that we will meet in the next conference.
That's my cue, huh?
Yeah. Thank you.
Say something about the other things.
I couldn't have said it better. So also thanks from my side. I think we were rather thematically a rather broad panel. So the synthesis is actually too hard, at least for me at this point. But I'll certainly look deeper into that. So thank you everyone for having me and the debate.
Thanks for the final words, Thomas.
Okay, so everybody, a big round of Tom. Okay, Toba. Wait. We're not done. Almost. Toba, you want to read it out loud, or?
Yeah, it's possible. Yeah, it's related to the ex-ante assessment. Is if it's used as a tool for board level approval. On the board of many DFIs, not using ex-ante assessment as a decision-making tools, one would think that should be the case so as to determine which project had the highest development impact and which one should be financed. However, that would be beyond the scope of the present study, given that each institution has its board guiding their operation. Nevertheless, some DFIs, including the IFC, IFDB, and EBRD, use ex-ante assessment as development outcome for project approval.
Thank you very much, Toba. Thank you very much for your input from remote. And as last words from me, it might not be my comfort zone, but I learned a lot today as well. So let us not forget, at the end of each data, measuring, model, anything, is a person whose life can become better or worse, depending on what we do with that data. So thank you very much, distinguished panel. And I understood from the organizers that if the authors agree, we will receive, or they will post the PowerPoints, the presentations, so we will have access to the information later. A big round of applause, please, for this great panel and for yourselves. Thank you. Take care.
Okay, please come and we have a picture of you.
Let's do a selfie or something. Can you take a picture? Yes, of course. Otherwise, I don't have it. Otherwise, they will not believe I was here. I need proof of concept that I was here. Thank you. I will send you the pictures. It's okay with you.